are certain things you're never allowed to do in the Camarilla. I did the worst. And no, it wasn't breaking the masquerade. They take treason far, far harder. I was perfect. I was born perfect. Paris, turn of the century. We had money, so much money. I had all the best teachers growing up, but music was my passion. Mine wasn't a sad luck story of a child denied his desires. My parents allowed me to follow my heart. They hired vocal coaches and bought me training in any instrument I desired. By the time I came of age, all of Paris knew who I was. They came in droves to hear me sing. Sur la pente d'Avignon, on est dansant. Sur la pente d'Avignon, on est dansant tout en rond. Carlo. He came to me that night after performance. He was a swarthy Mediterranean beauty, dripping with money and quite willing to spend it. He chose me that night. He brought me to his rooms in a palatial hotel. He fed me the most expensive foods available, though he, himself, wouldn't eat. We made love that night, and he was as exquisite as I was. He brought my body to ecstasies I'd never known could exist. He continued coming to me nightly, and every night was a new wonder. He loved listening to me talk. I would mock and deride all the nobles in the city. He thought it was great fun. He held great disdain for all the people in power, and took delight every time I brought them down. He told me I was the man he'd been looking for his entire life. Then one night he made me an offer. He told me there was a way I could stay young forever, to stay beautiful forever. I accepted with everything in my soul. Carlo opened his mouth and fangs grew out of his canines. But he didn't bite me. He bit himself on the wrist, holding it to my mouth to drink. He told me that was the way. That was how I would stay young. So I drank. And he was right. I stayed young. So long as I drank from him, I would continue to stay young. I moved out of my apartments and into his. I learned quickly that he was no human. He told me that his kind called themselves kindred, but that was their fancy word for something far more evil. Vampire. He taught me that I could never speak of them. If I did, it would mean a swift death for me. I obeyed. Following his instructions meant that I could sing and be adored on stage every night. But it couldn't last. Eventually, people would know that I wasn't getting older. Some were starting to expect already. He told me it was time for me to disappear. We would have to move. He asked me where I would like to go, and I told him London. So that's where we went. We made the trip at night and entered a room near the docks. The next night, we met the Prince of London, Mithras. Carlo formally asked Mithras to live in his city, and his request was granted. When he asked permission to sire me, however, he was denied. Mithras looked into my soul and decided I was unworthy to be embraced. And so it passed that we came to live for decades in London, just Carlo and I. But even that was doomed to fail. In 1955, Carlo brought home a young man, a penniless whore named Alistair. He was pretty, I guess, but nowhere near as magnificent as I. Yet there was something about him that Carlo loved, and Alistair came to live with us. He had a fire in him. He loathed those in power just as I did, but his anger was different than mine. Where I found them silly and ridiculous, he saw them as greedy and malicious and wanted them brought down for the sake of the people. He was a revolutionary. Carlo kept me around, continuing to feed me his blood, but we were never close after that. He would take Alistair into his room for entire nights without stepping foot outside. It wasn't long before he took Alistair to Elysium and presented him to the new prince, Queen Anne, and asked her for permission to sire him. Instead of refusing him, as her predecessor had done with me, she made a request of him. The next night, someone would come to him for help, and he would be required to give her his assistance. In return, he could sire Alistair. That next night, I met my first Nosferatu. She arrived at our door shortly after sunset, and she was the most hideous thing I'd ever seen. Her face was distorted in ways I didn't even know were possible. She was gnarled and hunched and looked almost melted. When I recoiled, she laughed. She called herself Berta. When Alistair met her, he didn't react. Berta spent her nights assisting in the care of newborns in the hospital, working unseen from the shadows. In her living years, she had been a midwife and never lost the drive to care for the young. But infants were going missing when no one was looking, and she needed help stopping the disappearances. Carlo and Alistair were quick to jump to her aid, but Carlo told Alistair to remain home and out of danger. He gave me no such warning, but I remained behind anyway. There was no reason for me to put myself into danger when this was for Alistair and not for myself. When they left, I asked Alistair why he wanted to help the foul creature, and why he didn't react when he saw her hideous face. He told me that it was a right and just cause. He also said that Berta's face was far from the ugliest thing in the room at the time, whatever that meant. That was when he retired to the room Carlo now shared with him, instead of with me. When they returned near morning, Carlo looked determined and grim, but Berta was ashen. She gave Carlo a wide berth and treated him with fear. She took her leave with haste. Carlo sat with me at the table, and Alistair came out to join us. He explained that a Tremere blood witch named Stella Armitage had been responsible for the disappearances. She had discovered a spell that required the final vitae of an infant kindred and was trying to perfect the spell. She had been embracing the babies, and, once turned, she drained them to cast her spells. Carlo had managed to stake her and bring her before the prince for justice, and Queen Anne thanked him and sent them away, with permission for Carlo to embrace one human for his service. They had returned the living babies to the hospital and returned home. The next night, Carlo embraced Alistair, and we spent months with the two of them locking themselves away nightly for private training, and me, sitting alone, the discarded plaything of a capricious child. Carlo would frequently venture out to bring home other young men for the two of them to drink from, and send them on their way with ecstatic faces. One of these nights, while Carlo was out, I asked Alistair why he was chosen over me. You hate those in power for how they speak, how they dress, and their general buffoonery. I hate them for what they do to the people beneath them. You want to mock them, but I want to stop them. Too many are downtrodden and oppressed at the whims of the mighty. Carlo thought he had that in you, but all he found was a vapid child with nothing of substance to provide. Anyone who embraced you would be creating a monster. Immediately, I fell into the greatest anger of my life. This lowly whore was calling me worthless, and it wouldn't stand. I would lay him low. I knew just how to do it as well. Queen Anne was holding court on All Hallows' Eve, and attendance was mandatory. I convinced Carlo to bring me as well, just in case they needed a drink during the party. We traveled to Elysium in our best finery, and I quickly broke away to socialize. I planted the seeds of sedition, informing anyone I could that I was planning to overthrow the prince herself. I committed the greatest sin of the Camarilla: treason. Word reached her, as I had hoped, and she halted the festivities, having me brought forward. She asked me about my words, and I told her that it was Alistair who was making me do it. I claimed he was my master, and I his ghoul, and he had plans to topple the corruption that was in power. He was seized immediately and brought forth. Queen Anne asked him if it was true. Did he want to destroy her? He told her that it was untrue. He tried to cover himself by saying that it was his human father who he'd been referring to, and that I was Carlo's ghoul, not his. I knew there was no way out of it. He was lying. He wanted to destroy the prince, not some human man. His own words had told me that. Then he told her his last name, and she stopped. She believed him? What did his last name have to do with anything? She asked me why I would lie and try to frame Alistair for treason. She did something with her hands and her eyes and her motions that made me eager to confess. I said that Carlo had chosen him over me. I wanted to be embraced, but this whore was more important. My beauty was far greater than his. I wanted justice. And justice you shall receive, she announced. She called for Berta to come forward. You are an ugly creature, and so an ugly creature you shall become. Your request to be embraced is granted. Berta will be your sire. Berta recoiled. Please, my prince, I cannot be so cruel. It isn't in me. The prince nodded. I'm feeling kind. Even though you requested a boon from me, and you owe me a boon in return, I will lighten that boon. Sheriff, bring this boy to the brink, but do not turn him. Berta, your boon to me will be to save him by giving him the final embrace. You will be providing him a kindness by allowing him to live. Does anyone object? Her words rang out over the court as a challenge. Carlo bowed his head, allowing it to happen. The only one I could see wishing to stop the embrace was Alistair. I was confused. Why would he want to stop my embrace, even if it was by such a foul creature as Berta? Alistair spoke for me. Please, my prince, this is cruel. I petition you to reconsider." Queen Anne chuckled again. "Wise choice of words, neonate. The petition tells me you object, but respect my power in the matter. Go back to your sire and let him take you home. I'm feeling benevolent tonight, and I'll allow you not to witness what is to come." Alistair turned to me, blood tears trickling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry. I don't wish this for you." Carlo quickly came to his side and pulled him away, carrying the crying boy out of Elysium like a devastated child. The sheriff drank from me, bringing forth the ethereal delight of the kiss. But it didn't end. I felt myself slipping as the world dimmed around me. I was about to fade away, when life was pressed to my lips. Berta's vitae, bringing me back. I drank with the thirst of a man lost in the desert, and rapture filled me. The feeling was short-lived. Every nerve in my body caught fire. Pain racked my body and caused me to convulse and scream as my skeleton distorted and twisted into new shapes. The prince addressed the crowd. "This is what comes to those who bring sedition to my door, even false sedition. This creature shall henceforth be called by the reaction his face will bring to others. Retch." I barely felt the hands dragging me away as I was taken underground to a room lined with mirrors. They dropped me in there and closed the door. I howled and flailed in agony as I despaired as I watched my body contort. My skin appeared to melt down my face, and my flawless complexion became pockmarked and damaged. My glorious mane of hair fell from my skull, and I became a monster. They left me locked in that room for days, dropping in rats from above, which I was far too hungry to resist eating. I tried to break the mirrors, but they weren't normal glass. They wanted me to be unable to see anything other than what I'd become. My mind took me back to the last moments as a human. Carlo, the man I'd steadily been losing, turned his back on me. Only Berta and Alistair showed me any compassion, though I didn't know I'd needed it at the time. 2 women finally came to my prison. One of them was Queen Anne. "Retch, this is Marie. She is one of the few Tremere witches I dare to keep near. There is one final piece of your punishment I need her to inflict on you. Nosferatu can gain the power to cloud their faces and look like normal people. Marie is going to block you from learning this power and maintain this magic on you for as long as I wish it. You may learn to hide and be invisible like the rest of your kind, but those are the only 2 states you will ever know: invisibility and horror." And so I came to be Retch, the hideous. I was so foul that even some of my Nosferatu kin had trouble looking directly at me. I'd become a cautionary tale, a legend to keep others from crossing the prince. Berta, my sire, was the only one willing to comfort me, rocking me to sleep every morning. I became lost in my head, in my memories of what I'd once been, my exquisite beauty forever lost. Sur la pont d'Avignon, on est dansant, sur les ponts d'Avignon, 我一定要手指头啊！